I was probably 8 years old the first time a friend tried to convince me to be a Christian. I was in Missouri. If God isn't real, she said, there's no great harm in believing anyway, but if God is real, then this Unitarian skepticism of mine would send me straight to hell. So wouldn't the smart, logical thing be to drop my religion and switch to hers? This was probably my earliest introduction to Christian apologetics, and I imagine I'm not alone in having had that type of conversation at some point. When I say apologetics, I don't mean apologizing. It's a Greek word, an ancient philosophical practice meaning to speak in defense of an idea. And it's long been a part of Christian tradition. These days, popular Christian apologists tend to take the defense part of apologetics pretty seriously, and the practice has become part of the so-called culture wars. Big, publicized debates with atheists, creation museums aimed at undermining evidence for evolution. And don't forget the box office smashing movie franchise, God's Not Dead. I don't know if you've heard of them, but they're very popular in Missouri. The first movie tells the story of an evil atheist professor and the brave Christian student who stands up to him and convinces him into a deathbed conversion. The apologetics that make it into the public eye seem to be about defending Christianity against the threat of secular culture and liberalism, treating faith and skepticism as two forces fundamentally opposed to each other. And it can be easy to buy into that framing, conservative faith versus liberal logic. As a non-Christian, a Unitarian Universalist, an atheist, it's easy to enter the field of debate ready to stake out a position and fight, defend skepticism, defend critical thinking, always ready to argue for my side. The God's Not Dead movie franchise might be popular, but so are YouTube channels with titles like Atheist Destroys Believer with Facts and Logic. I hope you could hear the all caps. The dynamic that emerges is one of hostility, an uncompromising commitment on all sides to convincing everyone that you are right and they are wrong. Like the people and animals in the story Roberta shared with us this morning, endlessly arguing over their versions of God. And I've felt it in me, that defensive hostility at times, and I certainly have seen it among my fellow beloved UUs, especially when we get into heated conversations about logic and reason and the role that faith should play in society. But here's the thing. It's not true. That framing, that the supporters of faith and the supporters of logic are fundamentally opposed to each other, opposite categories, it's just not true. It's not reality. The world is not split into faithful people and skeptical people. Because in the many great debates between skepticism and faith, each of us has the potential to fill either role, depending on the topic at hand. I admit, when it comes to the existence of God, I am more likely to be the skeptic. But what if the question is the existence of free will, or the equal worth and dignity of all people? I find myself ready to defend those ideals, standing on a bedrock of absolute faith that has little to do with hard logic and everything to do with a bone-deep commitment to my values. But the current culture war model would say that this kind of belief must mean I want to switch off my brain or abandon facts and reason, and I don't. There has to be a better way, a different framework. And perhaps surprisingly, it's actually a Christian apologist who I think can teach us something today about how to navigate the landscape of faith and doubt with a little more openness and honesty than the current framework allows. See, long before there was a Richard Dawkins or a Christopher Hitchens to argue against, there were still Christian thinkers trying to craft arguments to prove their version of God. Anselm, a theologian born in Italy in the year 1033, was one of those thinkers. As a Benedictine monk, Anselm studied Greek philosophy alongside the Bible and came to understand reason and logic as fundamental to God's perfect plan for the universe. He wanted, as we heard in our reading today, to find a single logical argument that would prove God really exists. He was ambitious. I admit the actual argument he ends up making isn't terribly convincing or even that interesting to my modern sensibilities. He's known for first proposing the ontological argument, which rests on exactly the kind of extreme abstraction of high philosophy that is deeply uncompelling to me personally, but made plenty of sense to his fellow theologians at the time and throughout history. What I want to talk about isn't what Anselm concludes, but how he enters into his project of proving God, and how different his efforts seem from all the modern God argument I grew up around. Rather than addressing his arguments to an opponent, some stubborn non-believer, Anselm offers a version of apologetics that's more like contemplative prayer than public debate, something private, internal, and vulnerable. God, he writes, if you are everywhere, why do I not see you? These are not the words of someone performing absolute certainty for an audience on a stage, as we might see from a more modern apologist. God, if you are everywhere, why do I not see you? It's a sincere question about the unavailability of God. His inability to understand God almost leads Anselm to give up his life's work. I gave up hope, he writes. I decided to stop looking for something that was impossible to find. But then, in the very clash of his thoughts, he reaches new understanding. Ultimately, his doubt and sincere confusion don't threaten Anselm's relationship to his God, but drive him to pursue greater knowledge of it. In his writings, Anselm says that he is seeking to understand what he believes. Seeking to understand what he believes. Belief comes first. He's not undecided or trying to figure out what he ought to believe. He already believes. He already puts his faith in his God at a gut level and just wants to better understand the why and how of the commitment that he feels. We UUs are much more likely to think of ourselves as starting with reason rather than starting with belief, starting with analysis and discussion and thought, and then carefully choosing to believe what we feel can be solidly justified to ourselves and to others. Many come to this faith precisely because it allows for reason to inform belief in truly healing and liberating ways. But today, I want us to consider what faith-seeking understanding might mean in a UU context. What do you have a type of faith in? What is something you trust and value at your core? Call something to mind if you can. It might be to believe in the inherent worth of all people, or to believe that it's worthwhile to alleviate suffering, or believe humanity is capable of positive change. We each have faith. And from there, how might we seek understanding? What would it take to defend that faith in the inward, contemplative way Anselm does? To find the part of yourself that's still unconvinced, still confused, still hoping for better proof of that truth that you believe in? The part that says, maybe some people are worth less, or maybe free will is only neurological illusion. The part that asks, on the scale of the universe, does our suffering really matter? This is Anselm admitting, God, if you are everywhere, why do I not see you? What would it be like to find that doubt within your own belief, and rather than shoving it down, actually have a conversation with it? Show it your evidence. Give it your best shot at logically explaining what you believe to be true and why. This isn't a conversation that can happen over the course of one sermon or in the course of one day. It's a practice, a commitment to ongoing internal debate. And this practice isn't about the culture wars, isn't about gathering ammo to win your next contentious debate with an in-law or a colleague. This is about your understanding of some of your deepest truths. Proving ourselves right isn't the point, but in trying to prove, trying to argue on behalf of those profound truths, we give them a sacred sort of attention. Contemporary defenses of theism or atheism may still play out on a public stage fraught with hostility and political baggage, but Anselm teaches us that admitting doubt, being confused, wishing for more proof, isn't weakness. It's part of having faith. The world has forgotten that apologetics, argument, doubt, logic can be thoughtful, prayerful practice. The certainty of faith is allowed to include the challenge and ambiguity of understanding. May we, each of us today, begin to see our own pathways into the spiritual practice of considering and defending our values. May we go forth willing to understand the truths we already believe, willing to embrace ambiguity, and joyful in the knowledge that our faith and our doubt will together raise us into the contemplation of great things. May it be so. Amen.